Thank you everyone for joining. This is Joy Allen, and I am the Customer Success Manager out of our Michigan office. I have with me today Kyle Kuntz, and he's going to be talking to us about backing up your OCI and data warehouse servers. This session will be recorded. I've already started the recording, so all of you are on mute. You can use the chat everyone window, and I'll monitor the chat window for Kyle. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kyle and let you take it from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Joy. So thank you guys again for showing up to another one of our webinars. I'm Kyle Kuntz, one of the NetApp Customer Success Program Managers. So today, I wanted to take you guys through backups within OCI in the data warehouse. We want to look at both on-demand backups and running scheduled backups. Now, there's not really a live demo today. I do have a demo environment, so if you guys want to see me click through anything, you can definitely let me know. I think the presentation should be pretty short, right around 20 minutes. We are recording this, and we'll be sending this out afterwards. But if you guys do run into questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll be taking a couple of breaks as we go through this to take a look at those. At those points in time, you guys can unmute yourselves as well and ask any questions you've got. Want to make sure we get them all taken care of, so please shoot them over to me. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go through and really look at backups in a couple different ways. So we're going to start with the operational server. We'll go ahead and look at your on-demand backups, weekly backups, what performance archives are, and most importantly, how do we actually go through and restore these in the event of a disaster, or say we go through an upgrade and we need to restore these and bring the data back in. Then we're going to take a look at the data warehouse server, how to run the backups there, how to schedule them, and how to go through the restore process. And then I do have some resources that I'll make sure and get out to you guys. I think a lot of the stuff is pretty straightforward. So without further ado, one question I get from a lot of customers when I'm talking to them, or one theme I've typically seen, is why run these backups on something like OnCommand Insight, where many of you are already running backups of, say, your applications and your important data. So for me, it's, I hear a lot around, what's the point of taking this? It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of additional resources. We need more storage space for this. Well, to me, you guys have spent a lot of money to extract valuable data out of this, to see exactly what your infrastructure is doing, to have visibility from end to end on what's happening across your entire environment. So we want to make sure this data is protected. And in the event of a disaster, we want to make sure we can recover this very easily. Pretty straightforward. Also, it's very easy to do. So you guys are going to see today, if you haven't taken the time to go through and set up scheduled backups, it's really a pretty straightforward process. And we'll talk through this as we go through the presentation today. Any of you coming from earlier versions, it wasn't necessarily as straightforward previous to 7.3. So with some of the latest versions we have today, very, very easy to do. Also, a lot of you out there have gone through upgrades recently or are potentially looking at upgrading to our latest GA release, and that's 7.3.2. Backups are part of that process, so it's very important to understand how to do these. That way, when it comes time to do the upgrade, you can protect the environment, go through those upgrade steps appropriately, and restore, and you're back online and ready to go. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another use case that I've seen is moving the data warehouse server or migrating it from site to site or across different servers. So really the best way to do that is just to simply back up that data warehouse and restore it to the new location. So you guys will see how to do that today. Okay, let's start out by talking about the operational server. So when we look at the operational server, it kind of helps for you guys to understand what is included in these backups, right? What sort of information can I rely on? What's available to restore or recover from these backups? So your weekly and on-demand backups, you do have some options, and you guys will see when I get into the actual screenshots of the web UI of what you want to include. But with those options, you can really have quite a bit of different features backed up. So all of your inventory and performance data can be backed up. Performance data is something that we need to check additionally on top of the inventory, so I'll show you guys that. Data sources and data source settings. These are very important, right? Take a lot of time to go through, set up your environment, set up those data sources and configure them correctly. So we want to make sure that if anything happens, we can recover that very easily. We don't have to sit back down and run through that again. Go out and gather all those requirements and configurations. So that'll be backed up. Your integration packs will be backed up. This is very important for those of you that have taken the time to set up any of these. So your remote acquisition units, your Ethernet monitoring units, your anomaly detection scores and settings, these are all going to be backed up. Your backup location and archive location settings are going to be backed up. So this is nice, something you don't have to worry about adjusting once you do a restore. Any notifications you guys have taken the time to go out and build out will also be backed up. Your users, your performance policies, things like annotations, business entities, and applications. Your device resolution rules and settings. Any of you that have gone through and built this stuff out, you know this is a very time-consuming process. It is something we don't want to be doing over and over again, or really we just want to minimize the number of times or amount of time we put into this. So by backing this up, if we ever have something happen or have to upgrade, we can now restore this. Also things like widgets and custom dashboards that we've built out. Queries, right? So really a lot of good data is being backed up. Now, there are some things that are not going to be backed up through the web UI process. So whether you're doing on-demand or you're doing scheduled weekly backups, it's not going to include your security tool settings. This is something you guys are going to have to back up on your own. Our upgrade webinar does include some information on this, as well as another webinar we had specifically on some of the security settings. So we can get you guys some resources there. The logs are not going to be backed up. Now you can manually back these up on your own. You can simply save the logs. You can also send those logs back with auto support if that's something you need available, say for support teams or for yourself in the event of something happening. But it's not part of that backup because of everything else we are already backing up, all that data that the logs are built off of. Performance data, it's shown here because you have the option of leaving this out. So it's very important if you want that performance data to be included in a backup that you do check the appropriate boxes. So we'll show you that. And then the licenses are not backed up. So if you were to say, do a backup, you went out and wiped out your OCI server for some reason and you reinstalled and you needed to recover this, you do have to plug those licenses back in. That is one of those things that will not be taken care of as part of the on-demand or scheduled backups. Okay, with that being said, before I jump over to showing you guys how to do this, are there any questions on what's included and what's not?
I don't see anything in the chat window.
Okay. All right. We'll take that as no questions. Again, if you guys do have any, just throw them right in the chat. So let's start out by looking at on-demand backups. On-demand backups are pretty straightforward, very easy to fire off, and this might be in the event that you're going to change anything. You're going to say go out and do an upgrade. Maybe you're bringing in some new devices, or you're running through and trying some things with device resolution. For whatever reason, you want to fire off an on-demand backup so you've got it, it's ready to go in the event that you want to be able to roll that back. So to do this, it's pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is hop over to our admin tab. We're going to go to our troubleshooting. And as you can see in this screenshot right here, right at the top is the option to back up. We're just basically going to click this. What it's going to do is generate the backup, and then it's going to give you the option of where you save this. Okay, so a couple of notes here, and I think this is really important. A lot of times this is being done maybe to test something, and maybe you just save it right to the operational server. That might be okay for short-term use, but if you ever want to be able to rely on this backup or come back and take advantage of it, it's very important that we don't save this to the OCI operational server. That way, if anything ever happens on the operational server, we know that that data is somewhere else where we can go ahead and grab that and restore that. So another thing to note here is we never want to store our manual backups in the same directory where we store our weekly backups, because if we have our weekly backups turned on, we're basically going to be choosing how many of these we keep. And as you guys know, with scheduled backups, it's basically overwriting the oldest one every time it goes in and updates this. So if we actually run, say, an on-demand backup to capture that one point in time in case we need to roll back to it ever, and we have weekly backups turned on, say we're keeping 3 of those, fast forward 3 weeks, our on-demand backup is now likely gone. It's been overwritten by each of the 3 weekly backups. So very important, we save this elsewhere, and we save it in a directory where we're not storing our weekly backups. Okay. Now for weekly backups, this is highly recommended. Every one of you should be taking advantage of this. That way, like we mentioned, if anything happens, we know we have the environment backed up, ready to be restored. To do this, we basically come over to our admin tab. We go down to our setup, and then you guys will all see this backup and archive tab. Now, for any of you that are on versions older than 7.3, the archive, this is going to be new to you. You may not have seen this yet. Basically, this is a performance archive, so we'll talk a little bit about it. But what we want to do is hop over to either the backup tab, or if you're on 7.3 and later, the backup and archive tab. And then we simply want to check this box to enable the weekly backup. We then want to choose our backup location and the number of backups that we are retaining at any given time. So once you got this information put in, please just make sure hop over and hit save. I've made the mistake myself a couple of times of taking the time to plug all this information in, get busy, jump over to something else, and you lose all those settings without hitting save. So make sure you take the time to hit save. And you do have the option, if you guys say back up to the operational server, to back that server up elsewhere, so that in the event something happens, we can then restore that file. It's really up to you guys. What I want to do is just make sure everyone's operational server and data warehouse is protected, so you can recover that if something were to happen. Okay, one thing to note here for you 7.3 and 7.3.1 customers. So if you want to include your performance or your logs in your weekly backup, first of all, you need to go ahead and enable auto support. Unfortunately, this is just kind of a quirk of 7.3.0 and 7.3.1. And then the options in here, as you guys can see down below, we can check what we want to include. So if we want logs, think of this as your extended logs. This is something that if you ever run into a problem with, say, involving support, right? You need to get them involved. There's a data source issue. They may want to see these logs. So having this information can be helpful for both you and them. If you want this included in backups, just come over and check it on the auto support portion. Your performance data is the same. So if we want this included, we can check this box here. Now, the thing to note is by checking this box on the auto support side, this is including 7 days worth of performance data in that backup. Okay. With 7.3 and later, we have what's called a performance archive. Okay, so the performance archive, this is 90 days worth of performance data. We can choose to save this somewhere completely separate from the original backup. So the benefit of this is we can make sure we have that 90 days of performance data ready to restore, but we're not blowing up the size of the operational server or the database backup. Right? You guys can imagine if you had a large operational server, you had a lot of data sources or devices out there feeding in, and you had a lot of these devices collecting performance information, and we backed up a full 90 days of everything, it's going to be a rather large file. So what we've done is we've split these apart. So we have your backup that can include up to 7 days of performance data, but you also have the performance archive for specifically just that 90 days worth of performance data. Now, the performance archive, it sits right below the backup that you guys saw on this previous screen here. So your weekly backup right under this, and I can show you guys this in a demo if you'd like to see it, is this performance archive. Same thing as before, just check the box, choose the location, and hit save. And as usual, please store this somewhere where we can recover this in the event of a disaster. Some customers I've worked with are storing this on some sort of unified storage device or SAN, where they can do things like snapshot it and protect it, and that way they don't have to have, say, multiple copies of it. Others, I've heard of cases where they are archiving to their local server, but then with the backup, they're basically moving those to another location so that they're on a separate server. Or you could just jump in and choose a path that sits somewhere else. Okay? Any questions on that?
Nothing on this end.
Okay, thanks, Joy. So what happens if we want to restore this? Where do we go to do this? How do we do this? Really, it's all pretty much in the same page. So if we come back to our administration, drop back down to troubleshooting where you guys saw we fired off the on-demand backups. This is the same place we're going to restore any backup. It doesn't matter what kind of backup it is. Basically, we are going to come over here to our restore backup. This can show you all of the recent backups. For me, I just go in and hit browse, basically point it to the backup that you're looking to restore, and once it's populated in your box here, just click restore. Depending on the size of your environment, it might be a very quick process. Some of you that have much larger environments, it can take a little while. I've seen cases myself where it might take upwards of an hour or so, depending on the size of that environment. So it's not painfully slow by any means. Now, the performance archive, in order to restore this, same location, just sits below. Point it to that performance archive and then hit load. Keep in mind, this one can take a little bit longer, right? It is handled in the background, so depending on how much data you have, it might take a while. It's going to prioritize the performance of the operational server over restoring this data. The last thing we want to do is see everything slow down to a halt because we're trying to recover 20 gigs worth of performance data. So if you do need to recover that data separately, you can come down and do that here. And keep in mind, you don't have to do those at the same time. So if you need to get things back online and say operate with that 7 days worth of performance data, you had that in your backup, you can come over and just do this restore. And then when you have a little bit more time, start loading that performance archive. It's really up to you guys. You have the flexibility. Okay, any questions before I jump into the data warehouse?
Looks like we're good.
Okay. All right, so data warehouse, same sort of concept here. Let's start with going over what is and what is not included. So when we run a scheduled or on-demand backup of our data warehouse, it's going to back up the MySQL instance. It's going to back up any custom schemas and tables. Your LDAP configuration will be backed up. Your data sources, connecting Cognos to your MySQL database, and apologies, there's a typo there. Those data sources will be backed up. Any of your importing or exporting tasks or reports are going to be backed up. Your reporting security roles, groups, and namespaces are going to be included in these backups. Any of the user accounts along with those. Any of your custom reports, including those in your My Folders directory. The one thing to note here is some of you on older versions prior to 7.3, the My Folders was not automatically backed up as part of this process. It required more of a manual intervention to go out and back up the My Folders location. So be aware when I show you guys this, if you're running on, say, 7.2 or even earlier, which we should definitely chat about getting any of those upgraded. But if for some reason you guys are running those versions and you need to back this stuff up before you do an upgrade, just be aware any of those custom reports, you are going to want to back them up. And anything that you've put in that My Folders directory, you'll just want to copy and back that up somewhere else. Any of your modified reports, any of the basically built-in reports that you guys have gone out and modified should be backed up as well. Now, the things to be aware of that are not being backed up are your Cognos configuration parameters. So your SMTP server settings, custom memory settings, really this stuff in Cognos, you'll want to back it up with the Cognos tool. So there is a way to do this, and I'd be happy to show you guys if any of you need to do that. But for your data warehouse and make sure everything's operating and you can restore and be up and running and ready to go, by scheduling or running on-demand backup, you guys should be taken care of because of everything that's included. Any questions there? Okay.
So far, so good.
Don't see any in the chat. So for on-demand backups in the data warehouse, first thing you need to do is get to the right location. So you want to jump over to your data warehouse UI. Over here on the left, you'll drop down to your backup and restore. Again, this is where you go for the on-demand. You'll see that the scheduled is a little bit different. And then we need to choose exactly what we want to include in the backup. So you can do all your data marts except performance, or you can include those performance data marts. Now, keep in mind, if you have a lot of devices and you are retaining a lot of that data in the data warehouse, by including the performance, the backup could be considerably larger, right? Once you've picked exactly what you want to include in this on-demand backup, you can come down here and just basically click backup. And what it's going to do is generate this backup file. Okay, so it's very important once you have this file, if you want to use this for anything else down the road, make sure and save this somewhere else. Okay, this is currently just sitting on the data warehouse server. So we want to make sure and either open that up and do a save as, and, oh, sorry, jump forward a slide. Either just open this file up and do a save as, and then save it to another location, or if you guys have any sort of scripts or backup software that's taking the data warehouse and backing some of the stuff up, then you should be good with that too. Okay, and if you have any issues here, for any reason it shows that it's unsuccessful, you'll definitely want to check in with support. I've never seen a case there myself. Should be pretty straightforward. So scheduled backups, this is what we'd highly recommend you guys all turn on. Just like with the operational server, we want to make sure everything is protected in the event of a disaster. Now on the data warehouse side, it's important to note with scheduled backups, it's highly recommended. You do have the ability to rerun a lot of that data out of the operational server to rebuild that data warehouse. But there's a couple issues. This is very time consuming, can take a while. Plus, you're not going to have near the same amount of data. If your data warehouse has been operating for a while and you've been building, say, trends in there for a long time, it's very important that you guys have all of this data intact and these trends intact where we can restore it and continue moving forward versus starting from a slightly clean slate. So to turn on these scheduled backups, what we want to do is same area here in our data warehouse. Just drop down over on the left to the schedule, and you'll see there's the build schedule above. This is for building the data warehouse with the ETL. Below this is the backup schedule. All we want to do is come in here, click edit. Okay, once we click edit, we have a couple different options. We can choose the location. So where do we want to actually save this? This is where it's really nice. You just point it to a different server location. We can choose exactly what we want to include in this backup. We can choose how many days we run it. And then we can choose when we run it, as well as how many of these we are retaining. Okay, so just the same notes you guys have heard. I'm pretty much just going to keep hearing this from me throughout the presentation, save this elsewhere so that we can recover it in the event of something happening to this data warehouse. Now, whenever you guys are looking at upgrades, it's important to note the operational server has an in-place upgrade, so it basically will back itself up and do a restore, even though our recommendation is still going to be to do a manual backup before you start any of that process. The data warehouse is very different. The data warehouse is basically going to need to be uninstalled and reinstalled and then do a restore. So it's very important that you run the on-demand backup or you use one of these scheduled backups if you know that it's been run right before that upgrade process starts. So again, if you guys go through that upgrade process, we have a webinar dedicated towards helping you guys out with that, and it will hit on some of these things. And any questions on that?
It's been pretty straightforward, Kyle. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so restores, just as easy, right? Come back to our backup restore. The top is where we run those on-demand backups, and down below is where we restore this. So just come down here, hit browse, point it to the existing file. It doesn't matter if it's local or if you're going across the network. Same thing with choosing location for where to back it up. And then you do have the option of restoring the entire database or the reports or both. Okay, so if all you wanted was to get back some of your custom reports and for some reason you weren't worried about the data, you do have that flexibility here. Just like if you didn't want to get any of those reports back, you just wanted that database, you've got the flexibility. So with that being said, really it's a pretty easy process. These guides that I have up here, these are hyperlinks, so you guys can go pull these down. It's basically going to walk you through the same process and give you the same details as what we went through here today. But I will make this available, so if any of you have to run through this at a later point in time, you've got the documentation on hand. Now, with that being said, I know we're running right up here on the 30-minute mark, so are there any questions or anything I can help you guys with?
Kyle, I have a question. So you did say to make sure to save your backup in the same location, correct?
Great question.
We do have a question from Patrick Omi. He says we can't restore, oh, my pop-up window came up. We can't restore individual reports, correct?
So you cannot just, through the restore process, Patrick, you wouldn't be able to go through and pick individual reports. If what you're looking to do is only restore a couple of those, then I'd recommend just export them as an XML, save those, and then it's really simple to just do the import report through Cognos and restore them that way. That would be probably the easiest if you're looking to do these on an individual basis. Otherwise, it's kind of like an all or nothing, depending on the version you're on. Does that answer your question, Patrick?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'll take that as no. If any of you guys do come up with questions, please feel free to reach out to either me or Joy. She can pass them along. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to hop on and learn how to back up your OCI environment. I look forward to seeing you guys on another one of these webinars in the coming weeks. I think Joy will be sending out a newsletter next week to let you know what's coming up for the next month. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.